Okay, so we're live. Hey, everybody. So this is our first dev meeting, right? Bisq dev meeting. The people that are here on the Hangout are those that are active contributors right now, either people that have already been compensated for their work or are submitting compensation requests regularly under the Bisq DAO, or doing work actively now that could and would lead to such compensation requests. And of course, we're doing it live and keeping the video on YouTube and so on, so future contributors can catch up. And really, anybody's welcome to watch. But I wanted to do this specifically, not just contributors, but specifically developers, contributors. Right. This is really a kind of focused conversation about that. So I'm gonna talk for some amounts of time. I don't know exactly how long this will take. I asked everybody to take 90 minutes, so we just have plenty of time if we need it. We might be able to do this much shorter. Let's see. But I'm gonna go through some slides and talk about some points and principles and stuff, and then we'll open it up to discussion afterward. Okay. Yeah. Let's just go for it. Huh? I'll share my screen. Okay, and I think it would be good if people have questions along the way here to interrupt and talk about it. I'll say something if I say, hey, let's put that to the end or whatever. But these are topics that are just, I think, very important that everybody really understands. So if you have a question or an objection or something like that, just speak up, please, and we'll deal with it in real time. Okay. Yeah. All right. So Bisq's mission, right? We've all seen this. We're all familiar with this, and I think we're all aligned with it. I think that's why we're all here, right? So this is not news to anybody, right? Secure, private, censorship-resistant way to exchange Bitcoin for national currencies over the internet. What I want to talk about today is a more specific form of that goal, right? What's the big audacious thing that we're trying to do with Bisq? And I say it's something like this, right? And I want to get everybody, aligned with this, on the same page about this. We look at, everybody's familiar with this. We have the Bitcoin world with its, Bitcoin is emerging as this base layer, settlement layer, whatever you want to call it, right? But most of the people on this call, or everybody on this call, as far as I know, is kind of calling the shot or probably aligned with the idea that Bitcoin is going in this direction where it's going to be an extremely high value. It is already extremely high security base settlement layer. And on top of that, we have Lightning and who knows what else will come for fast, cheap payments and all of that, right? That's the Bitcoin world. And the fiat world speaks for itself. National currencies, banks, traditional finance, payment systems, all of that stuff, right? So people talk a lot about layering in Bitcoin now, and that's a beautiful thing, right? All of the analogies to the internet, the early internet, and why the internet is a layered architecture, why that's a good thing, TCP/IP, physical pipes and cables, TCP/IP, protocols on top of protocols on top of protocols, right? And that's where Bitcoin is going to, all to the good. Question is, where does Bisq fit into that picture, right? And what I want to lay out for everybody here is a vision in which Bisq is a global fiat exchange layer, right? A global fiat to Bitcoin foreign exchange layer for Bitcoin. Global fiat foreign exchange layer for Bitcoin, right? This is the way that you get in and out of Bitcoin safely, privately, etc. We're nowhere near that status, right? We're a small peer-to-peer network, right? We have real users and real software, and we've been around for a real long time in Bitcoin terms, but no one's yet referring to Bisq as Bitcoin's foreign exchange layer, right? I think that's where we want to go. And that's not for us to say, right? That's for other people to start saying. That's for other people to start observing. If people start to think about Bisq in this way, we'll know we're succeeding, right? In the meantime, and maybe some of you saw my and Manfred's conversation about this the other day in Slack, I think it was, that in the meantime, what we should be doing, and I think what we are doing, is positioning Bisq as a Bitcoin native decentralized exchange, right? So we differentiate ourselves in the emerging decentralized exchange world, right? There's now like dozens and even more than 100 of these listed, decentralized exchange projects out there in various forms of completion, and most are crypto, and most don't even exist yet. And a rare few are even trying to do crypto fiat. When you narrow it down to the ones that are doing crypto fiat and are in any way meaningfully decentralized, the number of entrants in that space gets very, very small very quickly. I think you can really make the argument that Bisq is one of a kind in this space still. So my point here is that we have a lot to be proud of. We have a lot to position Bisq very strongly, and I think that we do that by talking about Bisq as a Bitcoin native, right, decentralized exchange, an exchange that uses Bitcoin as an application protocol, right, an exchange that's built on Bitcoin for Bitcoin. It's of Bitcoin, right? That's I think a compelling message. I just did another podcast earlier this week. It should come out next Tuesday, and it's kind of road testing that language there, so people can listen when it comes out. I'll let everybody know. So okay, again, we can jump in here. We can talk about this at the end, but hopefully that's an uncontroversial, kind of big future goal for us to achieve that, right? Something that's like really worth waking up every day and making happen. That Bisq becomes that, or something grows out of Bisq that becomes that, or Bisq deeply influences that global fiat foreign exchange layer for Bitcoin, right? We can't predict how it's going to go, but if anybody has a hand in helping realize that future, well, it's certainly us, right? Okay, so here's the thing. To achieve that goal, we have to scale in the most dramatic ways imaginable. And I don't just mean the code, right? I don't just mean Bisq's peer-to-peer network has to get hardened or something like that. It's scaling the human side of this endeavor, scaling development, right? And we are simply not set up sufficiently to do that right now. We've done a lot of work to get there over the last months, step by step, but we're still not there. What I mean when I say Bisq's architecture here is currently insufficient to meet our needs around growth and scale and permissionless innovation. When I say architecture here, I'm talking about the structure of the code, right? I'm talking about the way that things relate to each other in the code base, the single exchange repository, how some stuff is, tied up in layers where it shouldn't be, makes it real hard to cleanly develop something like an HTTP API, to cleanly develop a web app that talks to this stuff, right? So this is, for posterity's sake, right? Everybody on the call knows what I'm talking about here, but for posterity's sake, this is what we've been running into over the last days, over the last weeks, even over the last months, right? We've been developing one way or another this, HTTP API for user-built applications to talk to a headless Bisq, right? We want people to be able to write trading bots and things like this, and we've been one way or another working towards such an API for a long time. But it's been a hassle, a mess, a series of hacks, right? Workarounds to deal with insufficient structure and organization at the core level. So that is now leading to conflicts, right? Because there are different ideas about how it should be done. There are different solutions that people have, put forth, and that's, that's understandable. That's actually perfectly fine, and actually, I totally welcome it because it's a problem, right? It's a little micro crisis that we can handle now correctly and let it guide us in the right direction, right? By solving this problem well, we take one more step toward being able to scale in the right direction. So it's very important that we identify what the problem is, and then of course that we solve it correctly, right? So we'll talk more about that. in a moment what that can look like. But here's what I just want to super emphasize is that this last point, right? How I measure the health of the Bisq DAO. This is sort of dawned on me lately. I had this thought the other day. I'm now measuring the health of what we're trying to do with the Bisq DAO. I mean, by many measures, but the one that's sort of been most salient for me lately is how many private conversations must I have? How many private conversations do I find myself in? Right, and this happens in all kinds of ways. But one of the most insidious ones is we do a live stream, right, to the whole world in the name of being transparent by default, public by default. We say all kinds of things and share all kinds of information, and then we kill the live. We go offline. And then there I am with whoever is left on the call having a private conversation where the really interesting stuff gets talked about. The really important stuff gets talked about. And I hate this. This is a red flag. This is a smell, an anti-pattern, right? So every time somebody, and don't just mean me, right? I mean, for yourselves, right? Every time you're having some one-on-one conversation, especially if you're talking about other people, right? Other projects, the way that things should be done, right? Why you're frustrated about something. That's an opportunity to look at that, to say, why does this need to be private, right? It's basically, for me, a measurement of dysfunction. And this is setting like an extremely high standard because, look, people have private conversations in companies and organizations and teams all the time, right? There's nothing like necessarily wrong with that. But if you have a standard of radical transparency, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment, then these are basically red flag events. And the goal, the place that I want to be is that there's nothing we can't say publicly, with just very, very, very few exceptions, right? If there are things that we said publicly that would endanger somebody, that would put somehow Bisq at risk or what have you, yeah, of course you want to have those conversations in private, but those are the exception, right? So when we're talking about other people's work or whether this component is a good idea or something like that, to me the measurement of health, the measurement of a high functioning Bisq DAO is that those conversations happen in public. And this isn't just for some abstract, standard of transparency. This is all about scaling, right? It does not scale for Manfred and me or any other small group of people to be the arbiters, just casting subjective judgments over anything. The whims of our opinion or feelings or whatever. That's a bad way to manage this thing if we want to grow it to a global team, like the largest imaginable scale of servicing the planet with what Bisq provides. It's not going to go that way if things route through me and Manfred or whomever else, right? So again, like I think at every step, everything we try to do here with the Bisq DAO, much of what we're trying to do is actually new. Like people haven't done what we're doing precisely before. So at every step, it's like there's probably a comfortable path that seems familiar. It's like, well, I've done this before. I've worked on this kind of team before, and we had this strategy before, and it worked, and whatever. That's probably the wrong path. If it feels comfortable, if it feels familiar, question it, right? If it feels like, oh my God, I don't know, can I do this? Is this the right way? How will we figure it out? You might be onto something, right? It's actually if you sort of look back from the future that we want to get to, it will probably be, there will have been some trailblazing stuff along the way, right? Okay, so I just want to emphasize, I want nothing to do with politics. Now, human beings and interactions, right, do sort of just tend toward the political. I understand that you'll never fully eliminate it, but I want to structurally, by design, root that stuff out at every turn. So that's my point there. Okay, so if that's the problem, right? The problem that we're not yet sufficiently set up to do this. So how do we solve it, right? What's the next step or set of steps? And you'll see in these slides, these are high level principles and stuff like that. These are not, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is not super specific solutions, right? That's, we can all work together to find out precisely what to do in a lot of cases, but just generally, right? How do we move past the moment that we're at here as the team is growing and we have conflicting ideas and so on? Well, one is we want to refactor and modularize what needs to be refactored and modularized now, right? So much of this, questions around what's the right way to do an API and all of that stuff, it just boils down to stuff is in the wrong place and it's too hard to do what you need to do. In core, we have, data models with logic and validation and all of that stuff that's up in the GUI layer, and it really should be down in core, and core should be able to handle everything that people need, even if you're running headlessly, even if there's no GUI involved, right? This is like pretty straightforward, but it just requires the work of moving things around as necessary. We never had that need before. Now we have the need. Let's do it, right? Pretty simple. So clear standards, clear rules, strong contracts. We've, again, been going step by step by step here. So none of this is new, but when I talk about standards and rules, I mean everything from like Bisq components need to be AGPL licensed. Okay, that's a rule, that's a standard. We follow the C4 process, meaning that the only people that have access to repositories in the Bisq network, GitHub organization are the maintainers of those repositories. No branches in those repositories, right? Like basically all the rules of C4, all of this stuff is already done. This is not something that we need to invent. Like C4 is designed to service the needs of global scale distributed development teams. And it has a proven track record of delivering on that. So, mostly what we need to do is now take the next step, double down, really understand C4, and anywhere it doesn't work for us, adapt it as necessary. We don't need to invent a lot of stuff here. So when I talk about strong contracts as well, and again, C4 supports all of this, but just sort of by example, I mean things like, if what you need is, validation out of core, or you need some new, API, you need to plug a thin, purpose-built HTTP API layer on top of a headless Bisq node, right? Then you're probably going to need certain things out of Bisq core, right? And strong contracts would say like, okay, the ultimate arbiters of how that's going to go are the maintainers of Bisq core. So of course, everybody's free to submit patches, pull requests, propose changes, and so on. But the contract is the maintainers are the ones who decide how it's going to go, right? And that's true for the maintainers of every repository in the GitHub organization. So this sets up a default situation where you should just assume that what you're doing is going to be rejected unless it's a minimal correct solution to a single problem, right? There's just no room right now. It's basically unwelcome to come along with great big overarching architectures that propose n number of changes, right? Bisq is a working, functioning system with users, backward compatibility concerns, all kinds of constraints. And the only reasonable, prudent, appropriate way to evolve that system is one focused atomic change at a time, right? There's nothing wrong with Bisq, right? We want to do some new stuff now that needs better modularity, better separation of concerns, et cetera, et cetera. Great, we can just iterate our way there. One little patch at a time, solve one problem. Okay, a little bit more on that in a moment. Radical transparency, right? I've been talking about this, and in a way, I want to just sort of take responsibility for the fact that I've basically foisted this on the organization, right? This is mostly me talking so far, and I thank everybody for basically stepping up to it, right? We're doing a YouTube live stream right now. I didn't promote it, right? But people will see it in the future. We're doing everything in public in Slack. We're doing everything in public in GitHub. Obviously, it's an open source project, but this standard of let's do everything in the open is something that I've proposed and Manfred, absolutely backed up and agreed to, right? So, there's a reason that we're headed in this direction. It's not just some sort of unilateral idea on my part. But we haven't talked about it much, right? Like we haven't actually sort of like laid out where that's coming from. So I want to do that just briefly here in a moment. I really think it's part of the solution to these kinds of things coming up, and to avoiding them in the future, and to just scaling radically in every way. I think we do that by one of the parts of how we do that is through radical transparency, radical honesty. And I am not at all perfect at this. I'm learning how to do this, right? It's something that I aspire to to just never have anything to say behind anybody else's back, right? If somebody's working on something, first of all, I want my opinion to not matter, right? That's the goal. Like my opinion ultimately, Manfred's opinion ultimately, it shouldn't matter. If you do something valuable and you submit it as a correct patch, and we've defined what correct means in a moment, right? That should get merged, right? You found a problem, you solved that problem, that should get merged, right? You create a new component and prove that that component is valuable in the world as measured by that it has users, right? Well, who am I to say that that shouldn't be an official component, right? I don't want my opinion to matter. I want my opinion to go away. But where I do have opinions, Manfred has opinions, and you can apply this to yourself. I want to be honest with people. I want to say, hey, I don't think that makes any sense, right? Or I'm not convinced, or whatever, right? And then I want to turn those opinions into standards and rules over time. I don't want to over-specify anything. I don't want to create a stupid bureaucracy. But the goal should be to eliminate the need for importance of primacy of opinions wherever we can, and that just happens one step at a time, right? We can kind of institutionalize and codify things as we go. Okay, problems and solutions. I already talked about that. I think this is really important, and C4 focuses on this. Social architecture, which I'll point out in a moment, really focuses on this. Just focus on problems and solutions. Don't even think too much about super grand ideas. I'm not saying don't think big, right? Like, of course, think big, but take one step toward it, right? Find a problem, ship a solution, right? If it's a new component, ship V001 of that thing and get a single user, right? And get feedback, take the next step, problem, solution, repeat. Okay, and objective measurements, right? Demonstrate the value of your work through objective measurements. Talk more about that in a second. And where we have conflict, and this is again, C4 talking, social architecture talking, turn conflict into competition. And this is, this is a tough pill to swallow right now, right? Like the thing that makes the most sense, seemingly, is look, we're a very small team. We're looking at it right here. These are the people who in any way wake up every day and think about coding for Bisq are on this call right now, right? So the idea that there would be a difference of opinion about something, and that people would go two different ways and develop that different way, it seems like a huge waste, and it is, right? It would be much better if everybody had an aligned approach and a single goal and single vision, and agreed, and there was consensus, and they developed that solution. And I think that's exactly what we can achieve in this situation, right? I don't think there's any need to go do 2 or 3 separate things around APIs and stuff like that. I think we can definitely solve this one. But in principle, especially as we grow, when there's a difference of opinion, turn conflict into competition. There's no reason, if we structure things correctly, that it needs to be a waste of anybody's time. If people want to, there's 2 different Bisq Android clients being built because people disagree about how to do it, that in principle shouldn't be a problem for us. We shouldn't have a scarcity mentality here that says like, oh, every developer that comes along has to be maximized and has to get along exactly do the right stuff and has to follow some particular roadmap or whatever. that's not attractive to people, right? I say what's attractive is that you can come along and do whatever you want, right? Within the standards, within the rules, within the contracts. You can do whatever you want. You can build whatever you want. You can permissionlessly innovate. And there's a bar, right? There's a standard that you have to get over. Just because you build something doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, right? You have to actually demonstrate that the thing that you built is valuable, to be compensated for it, to have it be blessed into the Bisq GitHub organization, and so on. If we don't do something like that, then this is all going to go south fast, right? So I'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, so before we dig into any more of that stuff, I really want to call out this recommended reading. This is, I probably should have really made this point before, because it's just driving so much of the things that I lay out for people, the talks that I'm giving or whatever. I'm hugely influenced by these materials. This book by Ray Dalio, maybe some people know him. He runs the most successful hedge fund in history, Bridgewater Associates, and there's a completely different picture of, whatever you think about hedge funds, forget it. Go read about how Ray Dalio built this company over the last 40 years and turned it into the biggest thing ever. And how he did it is by building on these principles like transparency, honesty, and it's absolutely enlightening to read certain sections of this book. The whole thing's great, but this part 3 on culture and transparency and other such matters is a hugely recommended read. It made a big difference for me. C4, if you haven't read this document yet, and I just don't know, maybe everybody has, but for people in the future watching this too, simply go read every line of it. It takes 10 minutes. It's a very short document, right? That's part of its beauty, is its simplicity. This is the product of Peter Hitchens, right, on the right there on the cover of that book. This is the product of just multiple hugely successful global open source projects, right, achieving some of the largest scale of contributions and overall success. This is the distillation of that work, right? We're fools if we don't follow this kind of thinking or something better than it, of which I know of none, right? So really, understand C4, internalize it, talk about it, right? If you have some disagreement about it or whatever, of course, bring that up. Like I said, if there's something that doesn't work for us, we have to adapt it. So there's nothing dogmatic here. It's not, a religious conversation. It's just, let's not be fools. Let's build on, stand on the shoulders of giants here and do as they've done. So if you're familiar with 0MQ, right, that's, Hitchens' biggest contribution to the world. That stuff's all built using C4 still today, and it's just an extraordinary way to organize things. So, and then social architecture is this free book, Git book. Just you can go read it again. You can read it in probably 45 minutes. It's a short read as well, and it's providing all of the background context. Thinking behind what led to C4 and how these projects like 0MQ were and are managed, and it's just really insightful, right? And so, like, for every line that's in C4, for every sort of must and should and shall and may not entry in the C4 contract, there's a paragraph in one chapter of social architecture that like breaks down that line item. Why is it this way? Why is this statement there? So to deeply understand C4, you really want to be familiar with social architecture as well. And there's just gems on every single page of that book. So again, highly recommended. There's a bunch of stuff that I'm not recommending here as reading. These to me are kind of foundational documents. Okay, so thanks, by the way, for just letting me cruise through this stuff. I've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 more slides probably. I appreciate you allowing me to monologue again. Jump in if you want to, but we'll have plenty of time to discuss at the end. So let's dig into this. Compensation, collaboration, new.
Hello?
I think Chris just dropped out.
Yeah.
We need to give him a second to get back.
No.
Does he know he's dropped out? I want to try and get him on.
I just pinged him on Slack. Probably he will know, but looks like he lost the internet or something. He dropped out so quickly. What's your feedback so far? Have you heard about the C4 stuff already?
It's the first time. It looks interesting. I haven't heard it. Yeah.
Yes, Peter Hinchen is a very important guy in the open source world, and he built this huge project, ZeroMQ, the messaging system. And yeah, seems he has been pretty successful with this.
And also, I think in the crypto world, Monero has also adopted it.
Fluffy Bunny told me that it's somehow a little bit challenging. Or I think Chris is back, so we can.
Hey guys,
can
you hear me?
Hi, Chris. Yeah.
Hey, sorry about that. I guess my Wi-Fi just dropped. Am I okay to just continue where I left off? What was the last thing you guys heard?
Yeah, the last slide you had with the base values slide compensation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, screen again. Yeah, just speak up if you can. Okay, so right, so do valuable work, get compensated. So what's the standard then of valuable work, right? So far we've talked about it as basically don't submit a compensation request for anything that's not finished work, right? And that has sort of varying definitions, and it can get subjective, right? So this is why I want to talk about it, and I want to set some new standards for what this means. So finished work, right? So when we're inside of the Bisq Exchange repository, the standard of finished work has been and currently still is, it's merged to master, right? As a contributor, I mean, as somebody who is not a maintainer, right? But as a contributor to that repository, you ultimately have no control over when the next version ships, right? So we could say that the standard is that work is finished, work is valuable when it's actually shipped and there's like actually people using v067 or v.next or whatever. So far, there hasn't been any good reason to set the bar that high. So far, it's been the pragmatic kind of middle path to say like, okay, it's gone through review, it's gone through a pull request, it's gone through review, it's merged to master. That is finished work that is going to be shipped, right? It is imminently going to be shipped. So that's been, I think, a fine standard. And the reason that we set that standard, again, maybe everybody here knows, but just for posterity, the reason that we set that standard, finished work, and that there's a clear bar, is because if we don't do that, then you always have to ask the question, what are you incentivizing, right? And Manfred and I talked about this before on another live stream, but I'll just recap it quickly here. What are you incentivizing? We always have to be thinking about this inside of Bisq. Think economic incentives and disincentives at every level, not just the game theory of Bisq's trading protocol, but also how we develop, right? How we work together, economics everywhere. So if we allow people to submit compensation requests for unfinished work, right? Like, hey, I've been, working my ass off for the last month on this change, patch, refactoring component, whatever it is. And boy, did I, put a lot of elbow grease into it. So, please give me XBSQ. And we vote that in, right? And we approve that. We just incentivized people doing a lot of work and not shipping software, right? So if we set the standard and we say the only thing that gets compensated is demonstrably finished work that's past some agreed upon bar, like merged to master, then we flip that incentive right around and we incentivize people getting stuff merged to master, right? Which incentivizes people to bite off small, achievable, atomic changes, which is like all the direction that you want to go. So we don't want big, long-lived, epic projects going on, right? We want one problem after another getting solved in succession. So that's why there's a standard for finished work. There has to be something objective. If anybody was, if BSQ were live right now and people were looking, hey, is this something that I want to hold, or do I basically believe in the economics of BSQ, and they just see us profligately awarding BSQ to anybody who just does some work, right, on some subjective standard of like, oh well, it's probably going to be valuable. Well, this would completely rob me of confidence in the project. I wouldn't want to have anything to do with it, right? So that's why we have a standard, probably pretty obvious, and so far it's been pretty easy. Like, it's merged to master. When we talk about new components, right, and that's kind of the topic du jour, because we're actually introducing, we have work in progress, in flight, potential new components in the Bisq stack or platform or ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, whether that's an HTTP API or a web front end or a mobile client or you name it. Well, merged to master in the Exchange repository is not a useful standard, right? That whatever's being built there may never have anything to do with that repository. It's its own new repository. So this is where we need, to articulate a new standard. And I think that anything other than, so let me put it this way. Here's what the standard should not be. Co-founders agree this is valuable, right? Co-founders say, I like that. That seems good. Let's compensate that. And ultimately, that's kind of like brass tacks. That's what it comes down to right now, because there's a small number of people who have the lion's share of BSQ, right? So just in principle, if founders like something, then it can be blessed and compensated and all of that. And if they don't like something, then they can vote against it and it's going down. That's just sort of the moment that we're in. And that's too much at our whim, right? So I do not want this. This is back to politics. This is back to influence peddling. This is back to playing favorites and all of that BS that I know all of us want to be away from. That's why we're involved in a DAO, right? So what we want is a better standard, right? And what I like to propose here is that the standard is that new components are not valuable at all until they've demonstrated that they're valuable to somebody that is not us, not somebody working inside of Bisq, right? Doing work for the Bisq DAO. It needs to have users, right? There's no other way that I could know. First of all, I don't have time. Who has time to go look at every potential new component and really think about, like, assume that Bisq continues to grow, assume that Bisq continues to get interesting to people, assume that the next time we have a dev call, whatever, a couple months from now, there's 20 people on the call. It makes zero sense. It doesn't scale at all to just have this kind of like, optimistic position that says like, oh, write a new component, get compensated for it. Ta-da! That will scale, or that won't scale. That'll go in the wrong direction, I think. So set an objective standard that says ship something, right? Ship v0.0.1 of whatever it is that you're building. If it's a mobile app, get it in an app store, get it in a test flight thing or whatever, right? If it's a web app, you've got it up and running. It's, whatever, foo.com or something like that. Demonstrate that somebody cares, right? Demonstrate that people are, adding issues to your issue tracker. Demonstrate downloads from, whatever sort of artifact management repository. Demonstrate if it's a trading API. Demonstrate the signature of trading, of automated trades happening against Bisq, right? In some way, make a case that what you've built is useful. And that's much harder to argue with, right? Like, that eliminates to a significant degree even the possibility of arguing. Like, look, let the market decide. Do people like this? Is it useful? Well, who am I to say that, oh, it's insufficient, it's not, I just don't like it, right? or I don't have time to bother with it, or something like that, right? We want to get rid of all of these kinds of subjective, sort of too human-oriented kind of things over time if we can. So, so that's the proposal here, right? Is if you're building something, so there's basically two standards of value, two standards of valuable work. The first standard is for existing components, and there it's all about making incremental changes, one patch at a time, one problem, one solution at a time, and maintainers having basically enforcing clear rules, right? If it's a correct patch and it's actually a problem and it's actually a solution, it should get merged, right? By default, unless there's some really extraordinary reason not to. And that's the standard for existing components, right? So it's merged to master, it's finished, and you've provided some value, so there's every reason to submit a compensation request if you've done that. But if it's a new component, right, you're proposing to add something to the Bisq landscape, then there's a higher standard, right? So this is what I'm proposing, is we have two standards for what gets compensated, and the second one is like, how do you initially get compensated for that work? How do you become a maintainer of a new component or what have you? So, okay, so just on that, right? I may have mentioned a couple of these already. So how does a new component become official or blessed or sort of get into the, Bisq GitHub organization? The first thing is, and this is what's already happening, anybody can work on anything they want, period, right? And this is a really important point, right? I wrote this down in the phase 0 doc, but it just bears repeating. When we say anybody is free to work on anything they want, that applies everywhere, right? So if somebody works on a new component, some whiz bang thing, whatever it is, you're free to work on that. You're free to develop that. You're free to do whatever you want. Every other person inside of the Bisq DAO is also free to work on whatever they want, including not working, not looking at, not reviewing, not caring, totally ignoring what you're doing. And this is, again, extremely important for the kind of economics of the whole situation, right? What we want to do is establish a dynamic where when somebody comes along with something new, they have absolutely no entitlement, absolutely no reason to believe that that's going to ever see the light of day in kind of official Bisqdom. So there's every incentive, there's every sort of right pressure for that new contributor contributing a new component to be pro-social, to be really, putting it out there, like being responsible for the ask on other people's time, not wasting their time, making a case, making a proposal, right? People have been doing this, like people have been putting these proposals in. It's all very much appreciated, but this is the sort of principles. The first principles why is like it's on you. It's like 100% on you, whether or not that thing ever sees the light of day. So you better make a great case. You better not waste people's time. You better not, try to do everything all at once. It's just going to get ignored, right? Identify a clear problem, put together the most minimal possible solution to it. And, here's the plan. Here's how I'm going to ship that, right? Get early validation. Like, hey, everybody, is this something that people even care about? Should I do this? Should I waste my time on it? Who's thought about this before? Any feedback before I begin, right? All of that stuff is what I mean by pro-social. Like, you're actively engaged in making sure that you don't waste your time, because by default, you are wasting your time, right? By default, it's going to be ignored. People are just way too busy to just sort of stop and evaluate every component. And again, we should expect more and more and more developers getting interested. So that's only going to get worse. So people have to get really good at sort of making their case, and the best way to make a case is to make a case for something small that ships ASAP, right? That will get to the top of the priority queue much more easily. Okay, so anybody can work on anything they want. Do it in your own repositories, do it in your own GitHub account. Everybody's already on board there. That's all part of C4. Ship something, get users, get feedback, right? I've already touched on that, but that's kind of like, again, this new standard asserting itself there. And then once it's cleared that bar, and I don't have like exact particulars on this or whatever, but just in principle, once it's cleared that bar, now it can graduate into the Bisq GitHub org, right? If you're the creator of that component, it would make sense that you're now the maintainer of that component. So we spin up a new role in the roles repository. You're a maintainer, right? You've got to find a co-maintainer. We should always have 2 people involved in every repository. It's another sort of a good idea from C4 and social architecture for various reasons. Initial compensation happens, right? And I want to just dive one level deeper on this, on the sort of economics of initial compensation. Imagine you're putting together new component foo, whatever it is, and you have a plan. You've identified the problem that foo solves. You've identified the most minimal possible v0.0.1 solution to that problem to get some feedback. You've shipped it. You've gotten feedback. You have a few users that have tried it out. You have issues in the issue repository. This is going somewhere, right? You've demonstrated this. Now the question is, okay, shall I submit that for compensation right now, like in the next voting round? Because you're certainly free to, right? Like you've cleared that bar, that you have value to demonstrate, but it's early, right? Like, how valuable is the work that you've done so far? Well, we have objective measurements to the degree that there's a few issues and some feedback and some demonstrated users. Okay, so if the rest of the stakeholders are voting on that and they kind of evaluate all of that for themselves, they might go like, okay, yeah, it's worth something. Not very much yet, but it's worth something, right? If it was the case that you actually spent weeks and months putting together that very first thing, and you've blood, sweat, and tears, all the way, you might be reluctant to submit it so early, right? Because its demonstrable value is relatively low. You might want to wait a little bit longer, ship a few more versions, get more users, demonstrate, no, this is really going somewhere. This really adds a lot of value. And then submit initial compensation with all of the kind of evidence to back it up. Like, this is really worth what I'm asking for. Now, I'm mentioning this just to kind of like talk about the options, right? The control is just completely in your hands. Like, when you submit for initial compensation on something, of course, from my perspective, the way to mitigate that risk completely is just ship the simplest possible thing that could work as fast as you possibly can. Get that feedback, and you never had a big investment in it anyway, so there's no harm in submitting for initial compensation right away as soon as you have that kind of feedback and objective demonstration of value. You just haven't put that much into it, and then you can just take the next step and the next step and get compensated all along the way. So I think we can again, build that kind of culture of shipping early, shipping often, and avoid these situations where we're in a rabbit hole coding for weeks or months, and then coming out of it and expecting whatever fireworks and giant compensation amounts. That's all a recipe for upset and chaos, I think. Okay, a couple notes on Bisq branding. One is when you're, and I don't have the worked out solution to this, I just really want to mention this, something that we can take offline, figure out further later. When a component is not yet in the Bisq GitHub organization, we want to be mindful about Bisq's brand, right? And again, there's just 6 of us here or something like that, but assume that there's 20. Assume that we don't even know how many people, right? Assume really that people start building on top of Bisq in all kinds of ways. We want to be intentional in any case, right? Again, I don't know the precise answer. We want to be intentional about what we have to say about Bisq's brand, about Bisq's mark, about the use of the Bisq kitty and so on in those materials, whether or not you call something Bisq this, Bisq that, or and I think the answer is that we probably don't allow that, right? Or we make that a stipulation, like you can't put official Bisq branding on it. You can't treat this thing as if it's part of the kind of blessed suite of Bisq software, if it's not. And maybe the way that we can achieve that in a clean way is to give some kind of qualifier for people to use. Like beta is not the right word, so I'm not suggesting that. Something like, and I'm not really suggesting this either, but something like Bisq Labs, you know, that's again sort of the wrong metaphor, but just to get the juices flowing, like something that's definitely not officially Bisq, but is like a candidate in the running to become that.
Maybe incubator.
Incubation, yeah, exactly. You know, just something that people can tack on to the name of their repository or whatever, and we can have just some basic, simple rules for like the balance that you want to strike is you want to not do something different than the visual, you know, language of Bisq. You want to not deviate a lot from Bisq's brand identity in what you're doing. Because if you sort of come in with this, like, you know, however great it may be, if it sort of looks like Frankenstein next to the rest of Bisq, like that might be a barrier. It might not too, right? But the ideal thing would be sort of like that your thing is ready to just kind of seamlessly merge into Bisq's overall brand identity, therefore not confuse users and you know, all of that, but that it doesn't yet sort of claim that status by having, you know, the Bisq logo with no further qualification on it. You know, we could have the Bisq logo with some sort of overlay on it that helps make this this point clear. So again, just start thinking about that. We can make a clear rule as we go. And we already talked about compensation and economic incentives everywhere. So already talked about this. You know, actually, you'll notice, you know, really trying to eat my own dog food here. Everything that I've done over the last 24, 48 hours, every commit that I've done, every pull request that I've done, I've cast in the language of problem and solution. So in my, you know, I'm usually doing that anyway, kind of implicitly. But now I'm trying to do it explicitly, like literally problem, : you know, this doesn't work in the Maven build because solution, this change does X that solves exactly that problem and nothing else, right? So when you have something that explicit, that clear, that atomic, the position that you want a maintainer to be in when they're reviewing that pull request is that there's absolutely no grounds whatsoever for them to not merge it, right? You want it to be basically like, this is correct. This is to contract, right? It's correctly formatted. It articulates a problem and solves it. It has a commit comment that makes that clear. It you know, follows whatever other standards and guidelines and rules we have. Your job, maintainer, is not to cast judgment on that change. Your job is to merge it, right? And it's really worth reading Peter Hinchin's on this stuff, again, C4 social architecture. He really challenges me here, right? So like I said, I'm not perfect about any of this stuff. I'm trying to catch up myself. But the thing that like really is a challenge for me that he articulates, right, is like as the, you know, sort of founder maintainer of you know, the main 0MQ repository, he was always taking this like pessimistic merging approach. So he distinguishes like PM versus OM, pessimistic merging versus optimistic merging, right? And for the longest time, I think just it's like the default. You, as a maintainer, you take this pessimistic merging approach, and you say like, I don't think it's a good idea. It's sort of like a deviation from what I've had in mind for the project, or I don't believe that this is a problem that people care about, or whatever. And pull requests stack up, right? And people walk away dejected, rejected, frustrated, you know, whatever. Or it does get merged, but it gets merged like weeks later, right? And it's all basically just driving people away from the project. And where he evolved to himself, right, was toward this optimistic merging, which is the position that he took is like, document so clearly what the standards are for a correct patch, that you're just doing it wrong if you don't follow those standards. So, I mean, the most basic things like the code is formatted correctly, there's a comment, it's a problem, it's a solution to a problem, right? It's a correct patch. Then the mode that he got into is just merge it, right? Almost to a crazy level. Like even if it's sort of, he's sure it's a bad idea, he would just merge it. And the kind of chess game that he was playing there is that he knew that other people would feel the same way. He knew that other people that weren't him, that weren't in this power position of maintainer, right, would see that change and just go like, oh God, no, not like that. And that they would come along with the patch that reverts it. And he would merge that too. And that's exactly what happened over and over and over again. Or some middle path where somebody comes along and adds another patch to that patch that actually makes it better or whatever, right? And that's with ZeroMQ. That's a big important messaging library. Yeah, stuff's on the line. You don't want to screw that up in production. We probably have an even higher standard, right? We're dealing with people's money here, so we can't be irresponsible. So I'm not like suggesting that we get into like super optimistic merging mode where we just let anybody do whatever they want. But I think there's a lot to this idea that as a maintainer, you should really be just performing this single function. You're basically, as a maintainer, you're kind of like a Bitcoin node, right? Your job is validate transactions. And the transactions here are pull requests. And so you're just looking through the rules and the protocol, right? Is this a correct pull request? Merge. No? Reject, right? Or follow up or give a knack or whatever it is. And that's not just, Hitchens and C4 and ZeroMQ. That's Bitcoin Core, right? That's what, Vladimir Vanderland is doing all day long on Bitcoin Core. That guy has surprisingly little power. His job is, it's in many ways, it's kind of a, I'm not saying it's a shit job, but it's like, it's not that glamorous. He has a big old backlog of everybody else's pull requests, and he's got to go through every one of them and basically check them for correctness. That's where we want to have maintainers who have that role because they're clearly qualified to do it. They really understand that code base, and they for all those reasons. But that their subjective sort of whims are just getting the power of that is just getting reduced and reduced and reduced over time. We're going to say something, Manfred?
No, it was just your audio was, at least on my side, for a second or so away, but you returned quickly, so it was not a problem.
Right. Okay. So yeah, so much for that. But I just wanted to point out again, this is from Social Architecture. He's such a clever writer. Hitchens is just a total pleasure to read. It's actually like really enjoyable to read his stuff. He's a great writer, so enjoy if you haven't read it yet. But he distinguishes these. He makes up these terms, right? Like trash-oriented design. And it's really fun to read what he talks about there, and various other kinds of like bad, software design modalities. But what he lands on is simplicity-oriented design. It comes down to this, each patch solves exactly the genuine and agreed upon problem in a brutally minimal fashion, right? And so I think if we can just institutionalize this idea, right, it can eliminate a whole class of future debates, arguments, like all of that stuff. It just goes away largely if what people are doing is just solving problems. And they took this to a total extreme with ZeroMQ and other projects where they don't even have the idea of a feature. Like there's no sort of first class way to suggest a feature for ZeroMQ. There's just problem statements. Right? Like, as a user, I want to be able to do this, but I can't, right? That's a problem. That's a problem for that user. Okay, well, what's the solution to that user's problem? So they actually just eliminate even the idea of features, which I think is a really interesting way to look at it. Of course, doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as a feature, but as a way of managing work, right? Okay, so we're an hour in. Thank you for hanging with me, and I'm gonna keep going for a little bit. That's why we did 90 minutes, right? So modularization and refactoring, right? As I was laying out like a proposed solution, This is a big piece of it. Again, to the not just to the current problem about how do we introduce an API, how do we cleanly introduce a web app or whatever, but this is like, that's all a little mini crisis that makes now the time to do this. But by doing this now, it's not just about solving that problem. It's about really setting ourselves up powerfully to avoid such problems in the future and define these clear, contracts and clear boundaries and responsibilities and so on. And so it's time to do some modularization and refactoring. I drew this picture. There's a number of things about this picture that are just certainly wrong, certainly inaccurate. Don't worry, right? This is not like a prescription exactly, but rather a kind of overall, gist of something. So let's just start with what's familiar, right? Basically, everything that's a dotted line is like work in progress. Proposed, not finished, whatever. Every box you're looking at is a repository, right? Every one of these boxes is a Git repository, with the exception of these green boxes and everything inside of Bisq core. These are libraries, right? These are sub-modules inside of a single new Bisq core repository, right? So what we call today Bisq network / exchange would become something like Bisq desktop, right? Basically what's in the GUI module right now would get hoisted up to the top level, and we'd rename that repository to Bisq desktop, and it contains nothing but the JavaFX UI. And then of course it's sitting on top of Bisq core, and you can see all this in the notes, but it's very important that nothing in the sort of execution model of the Bisq clients as we think about it changes here. It's just a structural reorganization. So Bisq desktop is making library calls to core, network, common, consensus, these other libraries in Bisq core. It's now just talking to them as libraries, as it's always been doing. It's always been making method calls into a different part of the code base. Now it's making those method calls into the same exact code that's managed in a separate repository. So I'm making that distinction because while we may introduce things like HTTP APIs or RPC APIs, we may have a Bisq daemon, to facilitate sort of headless communication with trading bots and whatever. There's no reason to introduce that decoupling at the execution model with a running Bisq client, right? So single process space, Bisq as we know it remains as we know it. We don't need to have a thin JavaFX UI talking to a headless daemon or something like that. There can just be different ways of doing the same things, right? So when we want to have something like a trading bot talking to an API, right? Yeah, maybe it talks to an HTTP API. I want us to consider the virtues of doing things in a different way, right? At the core level, right? That we actually have an RPC API. You can think roughly like Bitcoin has. I don't want to get into that right now, right? This is like, we can take this offline. I drew it on the box because I think it's important to kind of get the overall gist of something like that. Basically what's in Bisq core is exactly what's in the Exchange repository right now, minus the GUI and plus the ability to run headlessly all on its own, right? So you can meaningfully run Bisq core as BisqD, basically, right, as the Bisq daemon, and talk to it over whatever API it is that we go with, right? And I think what probably makes sense is an RPC API at that level. That doesn't mean that there couldn't also be an HTTP API ultimately first class integrated into core, right? We can just step by step, we can take all this stuff. But the key thing is we want to separate out core from desktop for a few reasons, right? One is the biggest reason organizationally, like scaling wise, is there's just too damned much going on in that repository. When you look at all the stuff that Christoph is up to, all the issues, all the UI changes, there's like a lot going on, and it's probably only going to get more, right? We have lots and lots and lots of work to do at the UI level. And then there's like everything going on with implementing the DAO. And then there's everything that needs to go on with, you know, refactoring data models and, you know, really hardening Bisq core so that it actually, you actually can do everything that Bisq can do eventually, right? Step by step, we get to this place where you can do anything against a headless Bisq core that you can do through the UI, right? Unless it just doesn't make sense to do that, right? But, you know, whether it's account creation or whatever, you could conceivably do it all through headlessly through an API, through an RPC API or whatever. To get there, we want to have people focused, right? Like focused teams that are totally dedicated to, my job is I'm the maintainer of Bisq core. I understand every single aspect, you know, reasonably in that code base, and I can therefore, you know, evaluate and merge any patch that comes in. Meanwhile, over here, Christoph, whatever the team sort of ends up being built around the JavaFX UI, they're focused on that, right? And they're waking up every morning and they're pulling each other's changes and they're reviewing each other's PRs, and they're not, the streams are not crossing, right? These are like actually, you know, this code may all ship together, but this is like different enough domains and enough activity going on in those domains to justify the split. And the other reason to have that split, and arguably the stronger reason, is to absolutely enforce the contract between these things, right? The desktop client, the GUI, needs to become a client of core, just like any other client of core, right? And can make these calls into it and get everything that it needs without having, you know, data validation logic, you know, and whatever it is, too much of it in the UI layer, in the GUI layer. Right? If some API is going to need that same kind of validation, of course it should be down in core. So that's the refactoring. So when I talk modularization and refactoring, I mean both of those things, right? Let's extract core out, and then let's refactor every data model and whatever it is according to what you actually need, right? Like, what is the problem you're solving right now? What is it that the API cannot do or has to reinvent doing? Because something's sitting up in the UI. Okay, well, refactor that thing, put it down into core, and start consuming it, right? Just, you know, high level approach. And then you see everything else, right? And just its relationship to core. So things are either communicating with a, you know, headless Bisq-D, if you will, via some sort of low level, increasingly comprehensive API, like just lightweight trading bots that, you know, people write in whatever language they want. It's just user code, user space, right? So, you know, this is why RPC would make a big difference. Is you have something like gRPC, you know, some high performance, you know, high throughput, you know, RPC framework that has bindings to every language under the sun, and you just like throw the gates open and let everybody write code against your daemon in a type safe way, in a language idiomatic way, and that they don't have to fuss with you know, RESTful anything JSON contracts when there's like actually no requirement for that. And if you look at what Lightning has done here with their own APIs, you know, LND APIs, they started out with RESTful APIs in LND. They're still supporting it because they've shipped it, but they've completely changed their mind. The bias is now like strongly toward their newer gRPC RPC API in LND, and that's what they're encouraging everybody to use. They say that it's just completely increased everybody's productivity around building stuff on top of LND, pleasure on top of building stuff on top of LND, and just, you know, reduce the burden and load for the dev team to, you know, have to go tweak the, you know, RESTful stuff or whatever. And look, I'm a huge fan of HTTP, huge fan of REST, huge fan of you know, doing all of that stuff beautifully and well. You know, tons of experience with it and all that. And that's part of the reason why I want us to strongly consider not doing it here, right? We're building a different kind of system that at the lowest level, it doesn't have to be RESTful at that level. Doesn't mean there can't or shouldn't be a REST API, because there are certain things that actually do need it, like a web app, right? Like when you look at gRPC again, for example, it doesn't have bindings into a browser, right? You can do stuff for Node.js with gRPC, but you can't just, you know, consume it from a sort of normal HTML5 web page and that kind of JavaScript. So there's, you know, a place and a time for everything, but I want us to very carefully consider what we, you know, what we ship as kind of Bisq's official core API, and then build from there. So, and then all these other boxes, right? You know, Bisq Mobile and so on, whether they're talking to HTTP APIs or RPC APIs, or they're doing, you know, you look at something like seed nodes, right? Seed nodes aren't talking to a Bisq daemon. Seed nodes are basically just a headless, you know, a variant of a Bisq distribution, right? They have no GUI, but they also just make direct library calls. They, you know, they stand up a local Bisq node and do all of that stuff just in process, single process, no need for an API, right? So there's all, you know, different shapes and flavors of applications, but I think we can define a Bisq core that can serve those things minimally, conservatively, and can be something that, you know, currently it's me and Manfred playing that maintainer role, but, you know, whoever it is, they can really focus, right? Focus on the libraries, focus on the RPC, you know, exposure of those libraries, and that's Bisq core, right? Okay, so again, lots more to say there, I'm sure. So, and now this is just like really quick points. None of this is like so prescribed, but I just want to lay out, like, to do this, right? Let's attack the problem just step by step, right? So what are the problematic data models? What are the problematic classes, types, relationships that are, you know, too much stuff up in the UI layer? Just one by one, let's move them down into core, right? At every step of the way, solving one problem in whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like, no, like 2-week-long refactor the whole freaking world kind of thing. Just like move one data model at a time, or whatever it is that you need to do. And, you know, so the sort of standards here would be like, there would be no JavaX, you know, package, you know, imports, right, in Bisq core by the time we were done. That would be like a good heuristic, like, have we finished that sort of refactoring, or is there any more refactoring to do? Move types is necessary, refactor, restructure stuff. Of course, like I said, Bisq core must be able to run on its own, from its own main method. If you're running it on a you know, VPS or something like that, it can't puke because JavaX, you know, isn't, sorry, what I meant was not JavaX, but JavaFX. It's okay to have JavaX packaging, but, you know, it can't puke because JavaFX isn't around or whatever, right? So, you know, we can define what this looks like and just iterate toward it. Yeah, move data models around. Some JavaFX stuff, sorry, like properties, you know, are used throughout these data models. Many people on the call may not know, like the reason we use those property objects from JavaFX is because they behave like nice little observables, right? And it's just a really convenient model. And, you know, Manfred's quick to say, like, I wish that this was not in JavaFX, but was like actually just, you know, in Javadot or JavaX dot. It's not, and it may be the pragmatic thing to leave these sort of observable properties in place. It may not, right? It may just be, it's so burdensome. You have to drag JavaFX around wherever you go. You get these problems. We may want to replace that with some other kind of lightweight observable library. And if you go way back in the history of Bisq, you'll see changes that I introduced, like in whatever 2014 or something like that, where we did that, right? I removed all of the JavaFX property usage, and we put RxJava into the mix. You know, I don't know if people have used RxJava or similar stuff. It's really nice, but it's like a big, you got to twist your head around to it's a mental model shift. It's just probably too much. So if we can find some simple, pragmatic, you know, observable that can kind of like basically be a drop-in replacement for these JavaFX properties, that would be a valuable contribution, right? To do that research, solve this one problem, what's basically a different observable library that does basically the same thing as JavaFX properties, right? And that would just be one refactoring to do. Let's see, do I have anything else? No. Yeah, okay. Thanks so much. That was freaking hour and 15 minutes. I know some people have to go. Let's open it up. Questions? I'll shut up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the description. What I wanted to talk about is regarding how we could measure this, objectively measure any improvement in the system, as let's say it will be maybe easier if it's a new module than just improving an existing one. But still, also if you have a new module and we want to prove value, just to say the module has users has no value at all for the network in general. To say, so if that would be or it is a product, then the only value that it can have is that some module increases trades, because that's what the Bisq network relies upon mainly. And of course, we have no idea where any trades come from. So let's say we have an API and trading bots, and trades are done by these bots. Then we have no way to find out if on the channel that where the trades were created. So we rely on nothing that is really objective, isn't it? Chris, do you know what I mean?
There are things from my side as well. If you want to take that one first, Chris.
I can just concur, right? Like nothing will be perfect, but having basically, if that's the conversation that we're having, is how do we know that this is objectively valuable? Like, okay, yeah, it has users, but are those users actually doing trades? How do we know that they're doing trades? I think we're having the right conversation, right? That's a totally different conversation than I did work, please pay me now, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that this can emerge over time, how we, how the culture shapes up around it, right? What the standards actually are, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I think this problem puts the pressure to make really the smallest or shippable product to start with a minimum viable product and not with a huge finished project. Because when we would get now a pull request for adding a mobile app, and it would be feature complete, really same like Bisq you can do on mobile. I mean, what's the value? That can be, I don't know, a few 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever. And it's super difficult then to evaluate the value. It would be much easier to start with a small mobile app, which is doing not more like notification, to get a notification when your off is taken. Super simple. I mean, that's for sure not $500,000, but that's something like, I don't know, that's something which is easier to manage. And even if the valuation is wrong, it's not terrible wrong. And it's a slower process, or the contributor can get earlier feedback and can see how much the BSQ stakeholders are evaluating his work and decide on this if he go on or not. I think it's it breaks a bigger problem to smaller problems. The problem will not disappear probably, but it makes it easier to manage.
I'm kind of in the situation where I started at building a GUI, graphic user interface that can work over the web for Bisq, and that's really where I want to be. But I also know that's not where it should be at the moment. So I kind of, by chance, then arrived at the point where I'm trying to solve these issues of modularity in the stack, how data models are interacted with, how to refactor that out into the existing GUI, and how Bisq boots up, and how that sequence can work, and how to find the commonality in all the packages in the code and provide one module that can address booting up and providing headless and provide all the data classes. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm doing that because I know that all needs to be done somewhere to get, for me personally as a person, to get back to what I really want to be doing. So I've kind of put all that out there. We're a small development team, and these theories are great and they're sound, but being a small development team, I'm feeling a bit of a vacuum at the moment. I'm feeling I've put a lot of stuff out there that is open to criticism. If somebody can specifically tell me the approach I'm taking, that's wrong and that's why it's not going to work, or that here's a better way of doing it, or comment that that's a good direction, and then perhaps even help out on some of the stuff, because I'm just learning on the way. Every step is learning on the way, figuring out how things are already done, trying to plug into that and work with how it already works and build out the thing that's going to make everything easier for everybody. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. So I suppose that's just a statement.
Yeah. I mean, my main point is here that we are fixing the engine of a flying plane. Everything with Bisq is really it's a working project with money, so it's really high risk to do anything on Bisq, and we have to do something on Bisq. And the only way to make it feasible is to make really small iterations, small steps. So to have a big re-architecturing is just it's not feasible. We don't have the resources. It's too risky. So we have to break it down to small iterations, like Chris also said, are identifying small problems you want to access for the great offer. You need some type of functionality which is at the moment in the GUI. Let's refactor this out, put it to core, that it's accessible for you in a headless version. Then going to the next. And it's clear for me that your goal is to have already kind of like a working web app with a lot of functionality, and it will take some time for these refactoring processes. But to be honest, I don't see really a way around this, because I mean, luckily we have now 3 people who are working in the same space, so I think it can be done in a
I'm very I don't mind parking the web GUI and the work that I really enjoy doing, and that can happen in the future. That's because I see there are the larger issues at the bottom, which is the refactoring and the diagram that Chris presented there to get it into the right space. So, you know, I've been putting a lot of stuff out there, which actually essentially is just housekeeping, refactoring, and a bit of plumbing. If you look at what's actually happening, and it actually boots and it works, and it provides a class path model that is just really about moving existing code around into places that make it commonly accessible, and then being able to, in a very small microbit way, refactor every data model and the corresponding view model in GUI to pick up on the new event-driven, you know, the new event emitters and messaging. So
yeah, but I think here I have the problem. You're trying to introduce a new architecture in the existing, and I think first it's not really needed. I think it works fine like it is. I mean, it's just moving the code, the functionalities and methods from the data model to a new class in core. I think it's really not more needed, and then you can build up
that is what I'm doing. So that's what I'm trying to propose, and maybe I've just got the naming wrong of it. So I'm making this module called business, which really is just putting all the logic and all the classes, copying them into one common space for any module to be able to access on a common on a stack wide class path.
Yeah,
now,
I think it's already the core.
Just is really doesn't matter. But it's the principle. So it is exactly that principle, and it has to happen, you know, somewhere by someone somewhere.
Yeah, sure. Maybe it's really a little bit of a naming. I also didn't have time to look really very close to it, but I think I mean the whole architecture, it's event-driven in Bisq. Everything is based on event-driven architecture, and core is basically this space for the business logic. I mean, to have the right packages there, and so we have to do it properly. But it's already the right place there. The architecture is already functional for what you need. It's just maybe what need to be added.
Because I have actually been working with it, so I'm not trying to go against that. I recognize that it is all there. The only pinch point is refactoring the interface between GUI and the business logic.
Exactly.
And that we've essentially already solved in principle. It just needs to be done in the best way.
Yeah.
So, and that's a perfect segue, in the best way, right? So I think the way to think about this from a principles perspective is that generally the people who are going to know the best way to do something like an internal restructuring are the maintainers of whatever component is being talked about, right? So it happens to be the case that we currently sort of have one main component, right? The Bisq exchange repository is all this kind of one big monolith. But but I don't want to talk about it as a special case, right? Because if Bisq Front or Bisq Web or whatever we end up calling it, becomes a thing, you're going to be the best person, like by default, to know what such a restructuring or any restructuring of the architecture there would look like, right? And it would make sense for people to sort of by default defer to you about it, like, hey, Michael, what do you think about this, right? So so again, not having even looked, I've just dug around the code very, very, very quickly in Bisq Engine and so on. Here's how I think about it, right? And I really do think that this is like the way to think about it, is you're building something that is of potential significant value to users, right? A web front end to talk to a headless Bisq backend. That could be amazing, right? So first of all, I don't want to distract you from that at all, right? Like, you're making all this headway with it. Like, I'd much rather talk about, like, how do we get a V001 of that thing shipped and start to validate it, right? But along the way, you had real needs, you had real barriers, and you quite enterprisingly, created real solutions. Good. It's the default relationship to that solution should be, this is throwaway code. Whatever I did is almost certainly throwaway code. And if you think about it that way, then you can just do whatever you need as quickly and dirtily as you can, and say, look, guys, I have requirements that are not being met. I'm doing whatever I need to do. I'm spinning up new projects. I'm mangling class paths. I'm doing whatever you're doing in there. I don't know how clean or dirty it is, but it's probably not, just by default, it's probably not the way it's going to ultimately be done in Bisq core. It's just unlikely that what you would come up with there would be the thing that on review, Manfred would say is the way to go, or that I would come up with, or whatever, right? We've just been sitting in that code base for way longer. So it's just a sort of, the default position is defer to the existing maintainers and ask about stuff. What's killer about what you've done in principle is that it's there and it works and it demonstrates I need this thing. So if you core maintainers can provide this to me in a way that you're happy about, and I can throw away this throwaway code, then great. And if along the way you realize that my throwaway code is actually perfect production-ready code and is exactly the way it should be done, well, good on you, right? But that's going to be the path, right? We're going to think about it from first principles. We're going to think about it from what's right for Bisq, with all of the sort of unspoken, unarticulated architectural background that we have in the project. And I'm not going to look at anybody else's code when I think about how to restructure this. I'm going to think about it for myself. I'm going to do my own thinking. And then if I have somebody else's code to look at, I'm going to go like, oh, well, that's great. That was another way to think about it too, right? So it's just sort of order of operations, or it's like what to focus on. Like, please focus on Bisq Front, ship that thing, whatever it takes, right? That's the net new thing that's going to add tremendous value to Bisq, and that nobody else is doing, and that nobody else sitting on this call is like qualified or ready or eager to do. So, yeah.
So maybe I can also say something about the API part and how I'm viewing this. So yeah, we have kind of 4 main parts. That's the refactoring of the GUI, the boot up sequence, the APIs on the front end. So from the API point of view, the goal was to make an API which works without doing the refactoring in core, because I think that will take quite some time before you do the refactoring and then you still don't have an API. So our goal is to ship an API using what is there at the moment with some workarounds and some hacks, whatever, and present a pretty interface to the users of the API. And then once we see some uptake there, we can start to refactor without the client really also noticing the efforts that we're doing. So that was our vision. So I think, yeah, the GUI refactoring is needed. We also have some pain because of it, but for us, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. We would first like to ship an API, which does the thing that it has to do. And also, yeah, I think the front end is a very great thing, and when I would also so like to provide to everything that the front end needs, so that Michael can continue to work on it. So I think for me personally, the way forward is yeah, that was what Michael as he did in the past has some issues with things that the API doesn't do that he needs, and then you try to fix them. I think so. Yesterday we fixed the JavaFX dependency, so I know that was one of the pain points. And for the rest, the boot up sequence, I am. So not a small amount of the bugs in the API came from the fact that the boot up sequence, as we inherited it from Bisq core, isn't perfect. So I think that's also a ripe for refactoring. But for us, also at the moment, it works. It's not a priority, but I think once the API ships, then we can maybe take the time to do the refactoring, and then I think I'm also so willing to help with that. But so at the moment, suppose that you start refactoring now, it will take 2, 3, 4 months before the API will be able to do everything that we wanted to do. So I think it's more viable to have trading bots in 2 months than in 4 or 5 months. That's my position a bit. And also a thing on the gRPC, but that's on the side. Yeah, the API is built in 2 layers. So you have the pure Java part, and then the rest part. So I would view the gRPC as just another client for the Java, the Java layer. So I don't see a lot of problems with also adding that layer if needed. Okay, so I don't know if Bernard also has something to say.
He dropped off. I think he had to take off.
It's true. He had a holiday to attend to. Yeah. So that's, and I also So I also it took some time for me to read through all the code and the proposals, and I think they're really solid and good proposals. But so at this point in time, I think it's from the API point of view, it's too soon. Let's.
Go ahead. No, it's okay.
I just wanted to ask, because I have to rush off any minute. Can we maybe do another live call discussing exactly what we want to extract out of the UI code into core, so I can continue now already moving this on the way. So it's not one thing that has to be done at once. I can just put it step by step.
I can give a quick overview from my point of view. Also, there are certain areas where still UI display code is in the data models. Also, we have this model view controller architecture in the UI, where there is a view which is pure displayed, and there is sometimes a view model which is doing logic for the display, like layouting or like formatting and so. And sometimes there is a data model. Also, it's all optional. It can be only the view when it's simple, but for more complex view, like the create-off or take-off of views, there are usually these 3 classes. And the data view is the data model for the view, for the user interface. And there is a kind of like an overlap between the real domain, which lives in core, like the Open Offer Manager. And I had usually the approach to keep it close to the view as long as it's not needed anywhere else. So as soon as it's shared with other components, it's already moved to the core. But as long as it's only used by one view, then usually it lives in the data view, in the data model. And now we have new clients for this logic, like validation. A typical example is for calculating the amount needed for funding an offer when you create an offer. And this logic should now move, also these classes which are calculating this amount should now move to some classes in core, probably some new classes. And that's the main stuff. I mean, in most cases, I think it's really trivial technical refactoring. Yeah, you're moving out some method, some functionality to another class. I think it's really low risk and not really difficult. In the create off and take offer area, it's maybe a little bit more tricky because they're quite complex. But that's also my question to Mike, why he thinks that it will take a few months. Also, from my estimation, as far as I understand the problem, when I would do it myself, I think I could do everything in less than 1 month, probably. Yeah. I don't have time. I cannot do it. And when 3 developers who are not so familiar with all the code base or partly not so familiar work on this, I also think they can do it in roughly 1 month.
But some I estimate it has also included the boot engines changes. It was kind of the proposal that Micro put forward for the refactoring. Indeed, that could be so not a lot of that can be done so a lot faster. So I agree with that. But from our point of view, the functionality is almost done. So an API, we don't need anything more from core at the moment. So as far as we can see. So for us, it would just delay the release of an API. We now have almost all the integration tests. We have almost all the endpoints. So if we would start to work on that, it would just delay the release. So we would like to first deliver it and then start to refactor. It's just kind of a priority thing.
I mean, how complete is it when there would be somebody who wants to use it for a trading bot to make really automated trades, at least for altcoins? Or, I mean, is it already really usable for this?
Yes, so everything that I think the first release that I did, you could already make a trading bot, but now there was also added. For my release, you also had to set up first in the user interface with all your accounts and to fund it, and then you could start your trading. But now there are also endpoints to select an arbiter to get the funding address to fund your trade, etc. So it was already usable a few or so months ago, and I think now it's even more doable to do everything without the user interface.
So I know we want to wrap this up pretty quick, but I'll just try to add a few things here before we go. I mean, I'm okay to stay a little bit if people want to too, but so I think everything you said, from my perspective, might make sense. Like that's the kind of like pragmatic ship it, kind of like mentality that makes a difference. I mean, if we wait for everything to be perfect, then nothing ships. And so it's a wonderful thing. Not only that there is some code out there, but I think you have shipped it, right? Like I mentioned yesterday, I'm seeing the signature of what looks like automated trading come in, or somebody is really, really fast at creating 5 offers in a row. I don't think that's the case, right? So somebody's doing something programmatic against Bisq, and the obvious answer would be that they've picked up your API, right? So that's wonderful. So hey, that is shipped software. By the only definition that matters, it has users, right? So I think if we think about it as look, this is like super MVP, super prototype. Again, like take the default assumption that anything you had to do at all in that API that wasn't pure API, you're writing an HTTP API, anything that is not the work of HTTP API is by default throwaway code. Like, and maybe say, no, it's really, really good, and I want to work that in one patch at a time into core. Well, great, right? Like, let's see what the path is. So I don't think there's any sort of stop the world thing and we have to do all the refactoring now or whatever. It's just, where are we headed, right? So it pains me greatly, like as somebody who's responsible for core, that people are having to go do through all these machinations and invent all this stuff and do it all outside, doing core stuff outside of core. That sucks, right? Like, I want to fix that problem. I'm motivated to fix that problem. And I'm like, I don't, we got a lot of stuff to do, but I'd like to actually take steps toward that. And patches are welcome, right? To do that. So I think it's just all a question of the way that we think about this problem, right? Like, don't assume that anything that you're doing that's not the web app, that's not the API, that's not the mobile app, is anything other than a temporary solution, right? And furthermore, it's better than a temporary solution. It's a specification of what's required from core. And now we have multiple of those specifications. That is the best situation you could be in when you're trying to define new interfaces and new boundaries, right? Don't try to design for reuse until you have some use at all, right? Like these sort of maxims. Well, we have people using, like, we have real users of a trading API, right? We have an actual web app that functions, right? These are driving requirements down into core, and they make the process of designing the cleanest, simplest, correct solution there much easier. So this is all good. This is all good. The only thing that we have to do is just stop concerning ourselves with whose solution is right or whatever. Just assume that they're all wrong, and then go back to whatever it is that you're doing and make it core maintainers' problem if you're not getting what you need, right? I mean, imagine when it comes time to compensate, right? And like the Bisq API repository, unless I'm really missing something, is actually a fork, right? It's actually a fork of Bisq Exchange with now a bunch of modifications, right?
No.
Is that correct?
No, it's also it's its own repository, and we just pull in Bisq core via Jetpack at the moment.
Okay, why does it have 2,200 commits? Is that actually how many commits have been made?
Probably, yeah.
What's that? I mean, I was surprised by like how much work has like literally just the sheer number of commits that are in there. I guess if that's really the work that you've done, but in any case,
check the number of commits.
I saw 2,200. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But
so sorry, guys. I really have to rush off. Unfortunately,
yeah, okay.
Watch the recording.
Okay, we can wrap it up. But just Christoph, just right before you go, anything that you heard, and this is a general question to everybody, but just Christoph, you first since you have to go. Anything that you heard today that you just say like, no, that doesn't work for me, and I want to talk further about it. I'm not aligned, right? And we can take it offline. But I just want to see, is there anything for you like that?
Yeah, it would be great if you can continue. So I just have some topics that are more specific to the UI changes. So if more people are working on the UI itself, which might not work so easily in the current system, but I think it will take maybe half an hour to talk about it.
Sure, but no like fundamental.
No, nothing fundamental. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you gotta go, thanks.
Christoph, before he goes, sorry, Christoph. That like I actually have, I buy it's all throwaway code. I've come across. I think I have identified a lot of problems that are the interface between GUI and the data models. And if Christoph wants to contact me, I'll show him exactly where the problems I've identified and what I'm struggling with. And that might inform his logic to whatever he's going to be doing.
Yeah. Maybe we can do a call next week.
Whenever you have time, drop me a line.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. Okay, talk to you soon, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, and we can go on and on and on. But maybe we could just jump, because we can break this down into further conversations later, further calls or whatever. But could I just ask that same question of everybody? Like, anything that you heard today that you just go like, no way, deal breaker for me, and we gotta talk further about it. Anything fundamental?
Well, I think we can take it. I need to do thinking. I think we can take it up on Slack in a public forum, and have public conversations if needed further from there.
Yeah, I really just wanted to gauge. I mean, I'm not asking for anything like specific commitments or anything like that. Just like, does what was laid out today kind of jive, or are you getting like a bad feeling about something?
I feel just a little bit wrong. I feel like the solution is so close, and it really is so simple, and it's so doable, but yet it's feeling so far away. And I'm not talking about anything specific. I'm just talking about just something that, yeah, that's going. We're boom ahead. It's so close. It's just right there, but yet it's just a little bit far away still. So I'm just feeling a bit conflicted about that right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, just a simple solution would be, I mean, I'd be willing to do 20 minutes or something like that. Like, we got to keep it tight, but like a tour, right? Like, make your best case, show off what's going on. It would be a great input in any case, right? To see, okay, how has this problem been solved? What problem is it solving? And, if the outcome of that is like, Jesus Christ, the problem is solved. Well, what kind of fools would we be to do it any other way? But, I mean, I'm up for that, right? And that's probably the only way that I'm going to like review it anytime soon. I just haven't been able to prioritize.
I'm up for that as well. I don't know if where is the right time and place for that.
Yeah, I mean, just make it happen, right? I mean, just ask the people involved, schedule something. Just make it 100% your responsibility to. If you have some piece of code that you want to get blessed, it's just 100% on you. Mm-hmm. But I'm game.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's just really I want to be sure in my own head that the solutions I've found and the problems I've identified and the things I'm struggling with are known and understood, because somebody else can take them up. They can live in Core. They can live in Paris, France. As long as they're there, I don't really care.
Exactly. I mean, and this is actually, if I could request like the preparation for that session, is just enumerate the problems. And forgive me if you've written this down and I missed it, right? Just enumerate problem, solution, right? I mean, the problems are, I assume, just incontrovertible. Like, you had a problem. I don't question that at all, right? But separate the problem from the solution, and don't throw the problem baby out with the solution bathwater or whatever, right? Like, it's a problem. You need something. Okay, how do we provide that in the best way? That's all we're.
I'll formulate it and set up a schedule and see if everybody involved, if we can all meet that.
Cool. Okay. Anything else?
No, not for me. So I just wanted to say that, yeah, for me it was a bit conflicting also, the proposal of Osmo Micro, because so I looked at it and it seemed valuable. So yeah, it wasn't that I could say it's stupid. Please go away. But I also found it a bit distracting. I thought that it is a better solution than what we have now. But if we do that, then we're in the weeds, and I can't deliver the API. So that's kind of the conflict that I had, and I think of course it would be better to say that, to just communicate that. But for me it also took some time to really understand what the solution was, and what the difference were with what we had now, and if it was really better or not. So that all takes some time to process. But yeah, I think it's good that there are some guidelines on how to deal with this kind of situation. And I think they probably also have to be repeated. So a lot of times. Yeah,
really, as much as possible. I mean, this is an ideal that you never really hit, probably, but as much as possible, I like when I see just how much ink has been spilled over this topic. I mean, I surely haven't read all of it, right? But there's like an ongoing conversation for days, weeks about this. It's so painful to see how much time that takes, right? So like, as much as we possibly can, the ideal to hit is have conversations through code, right? Pull request, patch. And the problem is it like the initial problem statement that I put out in that deck, Core is not sufficiently organized and structured to facilitate that kind of, let's have conversations, let's have disagreements in code, right? There's these great big fat questions about the right way to do something, the structure of something, so people are inventing their own solutions, and that's all fine, again, as throwaway code. If we think about it that way, then okay, it's not a patch against core, but like, here's a repository that fixes the problem that I had. Please, let's find an elegant solution to it. And it's not my problem, right? Like, my problem is to build a REST API or whatever. Like, just shift the responsibilities to the people that are actually responsible, right? Like, you know, I'm
Sorry, we lost your sound.
Yeah, I can't hear you anymore.
Yeah, sorry, my headset died. You know, I'm never, I'm basically never butting in to what anybody else is doing. It just doesn't scale. It's not invited. I don't have time, right? And that's what we want. We want people to just go off and create things. But what's needed now is not just that structure, right? Like, you know, reorganizing, refactoring, modularity, all of that stuff to make it possible for people to just self-serve and incrementally just patch the problems that they have. But what's also necessary is the next level of standards, rules, contracts, all of that stuff. Like, I've done a lot of groundwork there, but what needs is more, right? So that people can really go do stuff by themselves. Like, you know, I don't want to get into the details, but we're going to have more bumps in the road like this, right? And the thing that I care most about is that every single time we bump up against one of these things, we like fix it at the root as fast as we possibly can. Like, that's our prioritization mechanism. I'm wasting fucking time. I'm just arguing, I'm typing, I'm chatting, I'm trying to sort something out. I'm spending more time in Slack than I am in an IDE. Red flag, right? So solve it at the root, whatever it is. And that'll be our path forward to evolving, you know, the DAO. Like, that's the way.
Yeah, as I basically agree also. I mean, one path what I see now is that both those groups, also Michael and Mike with Bernard, are just continuing doing their own solutions, which they should be aware that it will not get into the Exchange repository in that way. And another way would be that they both make a little bit of break and try to find what are the common problems, how to get it really solved in a way that it matches together with the Exchange repository, meaning that you make a pull request for these refactorings which are required to support what you need, and getting closer to that. Of course, that means that you probably are not so productive with what you're currently working on. The web page or whatever probably will not get new features, and there might be something like 1 month or so work where you don't see results, but then you're much closer to a version which is ready to become a part of the official Bisq repository, because it's then really integrating in the way like we see it. And yeah, to make, as said before, I mean, to make huge changes is completely infeasible. I don't have time, and Chris don't have time. Nobody has time to make big risky changes in Bisq. So the only way to go forward is to make small iterations, small low-risk refactorings. And I don't see a principal problem. Bisq is not a monolith. I mean, it consists of modules. You could put out all these modules in libraries. It's just not, no need for it at the moment. But you could put common and core and GUI and network as extra products project if you want. And the boot up sequence, I mean, that's solved in like in the seed node or in the other headless versions. It's just for the GUI, which is the most complex. It's in the main view model, which is another candidate for refactoring. But that's also it's not a big problem. It's a lot of code. Of course, it needs to be takes time. But I don't see a principal problem there. I think, as far as I understand, I don't say that there might be better solutions. But I think to really implement now a completely different, better architecture, there are for sure better architectures, but that's infeasible. I mean, I will not have time to work on this, to merge this, and to test this. It's just completely infeasible at the current setup.
Well, I'm going to look at the slide that you did earlier, Chris. Is it CR4?
C4.
C4, yeah.
Yeah. You know, because I hear and understand what everybody's saying, and I do understand how you're seeing it as well. But what I'm seeing, for example, is that I have created something that is exactly the same as what already is, except with very small modifications to enable a boot sequence in full headless, true headless, or with the GUI. That doesn't adjust any existing logic or any existing code. That's very low risk. So I believe that it's my job to communicate that, I suppose.
May I say something to this? We had already a discussion. So I was thinking, I'm not sure if I mentioned it when we had the discussion, but I was thinking more about this. I think the reuse, as from your concept that you're reusing the data models, is a it's not the right way in my opinion, because you will have especially for the mobile version, you will have a completely different UI with different requirements, and then we have the same data model, and the data model is part of the GUI. It's the data model for the GUI, the current data models, and data model which exists is designed for the desktop version, for the GUI there, and there will be differences. So when we put all together in one big bag, then this data model will carry some stuff which is only relevant for the mobile and only relevant for the desktop, and it's simply a wrong approach in my opinion. So I think the right approach is to move this out.
Yes and no. That is removed from what the statement I just made now. If we're just talking purely about a boot sequence to get a box that can boot headless or boot with the GUI, that has access to a common data domain, wherever data model domain, whether that is the existing GUI or whether that's a new class path in core or whether that is in Paris, France, doesn't matter. That actual thing that you can do Maven clean install and do that exists.
Yeah.
So
I mean, for the bootstrapping, there exists a few classes, these app setup classes, which are used for the other headless applications like SeedNode, Statistic, and Monitor. And they're always a little bit different with different features if they're using...
Yes, but that's what I'm busy examining now. But there's a pattern. There's a very clear pattern that exists that is common to all of them, whether it be SeedNode. I've observed, that's just what I know. You built it, so I'm not trying to tell you, because I know you know as well that there's a very clear processing arguments, deciding what thread processor I need, getting that thread processor, doing the injection model, getting the injection model to the right place to be consumed, and then doing the boot sequence, which provides my services. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just to build the thing that makes that easy for a developer to do all of that in any scenario by just pulling in a dependency in Maven. So that really is what Engine is. It's very, very simple and it can be made better and it can improve. I just want to know, should I spend time on that or not? Or should I just do something else? I can go explore WebSockets and see whether, it's a better model or faster than request response. That's something else I could be doing, but I just need to find a space where I'm doing something that is going to be of most productive value.
So I will let Manfred and Chris answer that one maybe, but from my point of view, my ideal scenario would be that there are two Michaels, and a Michael who is an API consumer, one who is creating issues against the API for stuff that the API doesn't provide, and then I try to solve them, and then the other also Michael who sees that the architecture or the GUI refactoring is an issue, and when you try to solve that against the core repository, I think those are for me that would be ideal, because then I get variable feedback. You don't have to spend time to recreate the API, and core will also get better through your efforts, and maybe we will find something in the API which I can't solve without refactoring core, and then we can do that together, because yeah, then for the API there is also a clear need to do it. That's my point of view.
I think, Mike, there's probably a lot of stuff that I've done already that's going to make it a lot easier for you to move a lot faster rolling out new API functionality, and make it a lot easier for you to build the API out. And I think we just maybe need to sit together again and look over it again, and see if there's anything I can give you that can very quickly make it possible for you to make your work a lot easier.
So of course, I think pull requests against the API are also so welcome. If we can discuss and we find something that you can improve, feel free. But for us, the API is kind of feature complete. We don't need anything extra at the moment, so the need is not so high to now start the refactoring. So the number one priority is now to get the new APIs, the new API endpoints out, to have it all integration tested, so that we don't break stuff. I think that's now our priority, and also to serve people like you who create the front end, to make sure that you have everything that you need. That's now our top priority.
Mike, one question regarding the integration tests. Are they using the REST API or using just your code base for doing the integration tests?
They are so using the REST APIs. That might be a point of
why they are not going directly in Java?
Yeah, you could do that, but then you're not testing the REST API.
Yeah, no, that's different thing. Because for me, a big value is to have really integration tests. But when they're testing a different project with different code, it's not so valuable, because when we run it for a new release, we don't know if it has not tested the code that we're shipping. And especially I mean, it would be for me, of course, I see the value for the API for the tests there as well, but to have these tests. And I don't know why REST API is required for these tests. I think they can work as well directly to test directly the Java code.
We didn't set out to write integration tests for core. We set out to write integration tests for the HTTP API. So that's what we did, because that's the product that we deliver to the client, the API. And suppose that the Java layer all works perfectly, but we messed up something in the HTTP API, then we have to see that. But so of course the REST goes directly the Java layer, and the Java layer goes directly the core jars. So suppose that something really breaks in core, we will probably see it as well. But it's just an indirection in between. But I mean, it could be indeed a discussion to say we should also have that for the Java parts. Yes, sure. But the big work was to make the integration framework. Now to add new kinds of tests, it's kind of easy.
Yeah, my main concern is that you are copying code over, and there is just recently a lot of changes and so on. Probably we're out of sync, and so the tests are not so. I mean, when we can guarantee that going over the API layer to the core has no introduced any errors or so, and it's through the same code base and everything, then there will not be much risk that when it works with API, that it also works with core. But at the moment, I think that's not really guaranteed.
No, it's not guaranteed. So we always have the call to the core service or to the core, so the manager that is tested, but indeed we have some code around that to check things, and that might get out of things. So for data refactoring, that's then the next goal. Once we ship the API, then you start to see how we can eliminate all that code duplication.
I mean, yeah, as my strategy would be really, I mean, when you think you have a good solution for any problem, make a pull request. And when you see the pull request is so huge, then it's the wrong approach. You have to break your problem and your solution to small parts that it's mergeable, that we can handle it. And like Michael, when you think you have a good solution for this bootstrapping, I mean, there is already a solution. I mean, in the GUI app, it's not implemented or it's not extracted. It's in this main view model, which should be refactored. But basically, there are these classes, this app setup classes, which are doing all this and trying to avoid code duplication. But at the moment, there's only one application which has all the complexity of the full application. That's the GUI. So there was no reason to extract it. I mean, yeah, not time to do it. When you have an alternative, better solution, and it's doable, when it's not huge, make a pull request. When it's huge, yeah, it's not feasible to do it now. I will not have time to do a refactoring, which takes me 1 week or 2 week works. I have to focus on the DAO work, and I only can spend minimal time on pull requests.
I think just as a takeaway, right? If everybody can think about what they're doing in these terms, then I think we're fundamentally aligned. Whatever it is that you're building, right? If you're building a web front end, if you're building a web API, an HTTP API, if you're building a mobile app, if you're building a trading bot, right? Everything that you need for that thing, right? If it's a HTTP API, everything you need that is not HTTP API should be coming from core. If you're building a web app, everything you need should be coming from Bisq related, should be coming from the HTTP API, right? If you're building a trading bot, everything you need should be coming from either an HTTP API or a lower level RPC API coming out of core. So think about if you can just think about, there's a box called core, right? That everybody sits on top of, and it should be able to do everything you need with regard to Bisq trading, right? Running a Bisq node, being a node on the peer-to-peer network. Then that aligns all of the responsibilities, right? There's going to be an extraordinary burden of proof for somebody to come along and say, there's another low-level thing besides Bisq core that I need, right? Whether it's Bisq engine or anything else, that's going to be an extraordinarily high bar to clear, because that's what core is, right? So anything that does it outside of that is sort of wrong by default. And I'm not saying that those things might not be right inside of engine or whatever and can be adapted inside of core, but the place that it goes is core. We're going to extract core out. So you're either talking to it as a library, you're talking to it via an RPC API if we do that. And when the HTTP API is really and properly ready to go, then it probably makes sense to include the HTTP API in core, right? Because ultimately you don't want to have to spin up this extra separate thing. Right now we're doing that just because it's in incubation phase, right? And it's all full of like prototype and probably some throwaway code and all of that stuff. There's lots and lots of refactoring to do. So we quarantine stuff, right? But that's a temporary situation, right? If it's really core, it goes in core. And if everybody thinks about it that way, like I'm going to aggressively move to separate these two things, right? We'll have Bisq desktop and Bisq core ASAP. We got to talk more about them. I'm going to meet with Christoph on Monday. You know, we'll make sure we do the right thing here. I'm not going to just like commit it after this call, but like really, really soon we'll be in a place where you can actually regard Bisq core as this thing on its own, that if you have needs that are not being met in your higher level application or API or whatever, get it into core, right? Whether through a patch or a conversation or add an issue or whatever it is. And if you have to do some stopgap measure in the meantime, that's exactly what it is. By definition, it's a stopgap measure. It's a Band-Aid. It's throwaway code until it gets into core, right? And again, maybe there's some other architecture that really is the right way to go here. It's just the burden of proof is on whomever is suggesting that. And it is a high burden of proof. Why would we add another component if we don't need to, right? So
Chris, I don't think there is another architecture, because the diagram you drew and show earlier, I assume that's the architecture you're speaking of moving into core. And that is essentially really, I suppose, the temporary solutions that I've been working on to provide is exactly what it is.
Yeah, great. Then they should be
best way.
It should be a validation of each other, right? If it's the same solution, then they should be mirror images of each other, and we'll just say like, oh, you were just ahead of me, right? You were just ahead of that refactoring, and great. But there's probably 1,000 nuances that there are just things that you wouldn't know or assume, right? Like a lot of the things that you may have looked at are not even the way we want to do it. It's just how it's evolved, right? And if we're in the middle of refactoring, we might actually do things differently. It's just there's so much history and context wrapped up in this that there's just no reason to believe that it would be the correct way just because you did it, right? I mean, like really, no offense, but it's sort of the wrong default position to take. Just radical honesty, right? Like the right default position to take is, you know all about core, I defer to you. And then if you end up doing something brilliant, then whoa, right? Hey, wow, thanks. But now we're in this like sort of there's something being defended here, and it creates there's this tension about it. It's just unnecessary, right? Just solve your problem, write some throwaway code, say here's a suggestion, and I'm going back to my web app, right? I'm gonna go build Bisq Branding. Like that, like that's what's wanted and needed.
Yeah.
And I will be the first one to say, if you walk me through this in 20 minutes and I go, dude, amazing. I'll tell you exactly what my opinion of it is, and I'll tell you exactly the likelihood of it just being sort of wholesale dropped into Bisq core. There's no reason to believe that it's going to do that right now. So you just gotta convince me, right? You gotta convince me.
I don't. It's plumbing, really, and it's taking what's already there. And I suppose a lot of what I've been saying to you, Mike, as well, from the early days when we were working on the API, and I was sourcing my information for the front end from your API code, is that there is an architectural problem beneath it that I'm not trusting anymore, that I can't rely on it because it's breaking too often and it's working around too many things. And I suppose that's why I built these other solutions. I wasn't trying to make something that is the next big great thing. I'm trying to find the solution within the architecture of what already exists. So,
and that's welcome for exactly what it's worth, which is exploring a problem space and finding something that works, right? That is valuable. That is appreciated, because it will then like whatever the solution ends up being, like it has to at least do what you've done. It has to solve the problem that you've solved there better, right? More elegantly, more natively to Bisq, whatever, right? That's all good, right? Enumerating the problems and finding solutions is totally welcome. Taking the default position that this is the right thing, or that we should go forward with this, that's what creates conflict, right? Mm-hmm. It's like there's a humility to take on here. It's just like, I'm pretty sure this is not the way. Why? Because it's just not my expertise. I mean, it's not my domain. I mean, you might be a super genius, but probably nobody would just walk into Bisq. I'm not even in that position. I spent years away from this code base, right? I have more commits than anybody except Manfred, and I was away for years. And my default position is, I don't know what the fuck to do, right? Like, but that's my job, right? I have the maintainer hat until somebody else takes it. So that's my job, is to dig in and figure it out. And I assume it's going to take me a long, hard thinking to come up with all the context that I do have, what the right solution is to whatever these problems are, right? So it's just the way you approach something from a social perspective. That's the only thing at issue here, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fair enough. I do take that, Chris. that's fair criticism.
Thanks for saying so. Shall we break?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you guys. That was a marathon. I try to never call meetings, and I guess every once in a while we need to. So
yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks everybody. It was good.
Cool.
Good conversation.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.